In 1995, the Crypt Keeper left the confines of the small screen and took his antics onto the big screen for the first Tales from the Crypt movie, the fan favourite Demon Knight, a shamelessly and wonderfully over-the-top horror comedy romp involving demons and an unapologetically over-the-top Billy Zane, where Zane plays the Collector, who is out to get a drifter called Frank Breaker, played by William Sadler. Their cat and mouse feud ends up in a rundown boarding house, where it's discovered the Collector is an evil being of the ages, who is after some artifact keys that'll unleash all the evil and darkness from hell into the world, where a crazy night of supernatural shenanigans ensue in this horror comedy that attempted to put Tales from the Crypt on the cinematic map. Which is also probably the only movie where you'll see a hyperactive Billy Zane with a sponge in his mouth. Brilliant. Hey, so today we are exploring the first theatrical Tales from the Crypt movie by looking into 10 things that you didn't know about Demon Knight to see if it holds up and is a worthy extension of the popular horror series. So, let's check it out. Number 10, Demon Knight predates the Tales from the Crypt series. Despite the fact that Demon Knight is a Tales from the Crypt themed movie, which came out 6 years after the TV show's debut broadcast in 1989, the Demon Knight production itself actually predates the Tales from the Crypt series. So originally it wasn't Tales from the Crypt related, as the first draft of the script was written in 1987, 2 years before the Crypt Keeper would taunt viewers with his ghoulish puns in 1989. And so naturally, unlike the series, Demon Knight is an original story, not based on any EC horror comics. The script was written by writing team Ethan Reif and Cyrus Voris, who would go on to write Bulletproof Monk and Kung Fu Panda. Demon Knight was also written by a writer called Mark Bishop?
Wait a minute, Mark Bishop? But that's my name! Did I write this movie? I don't remember that. Okay, obviously the writer and I share the same name. But still, weird, huh? What are the odds?
Number 9, a famous horror director abandoned Demon Knight. Speaking of people who share the same name, Tom Holland, as in the director, not Spider-Man, got involved in the Demon Knight project in the late 80s. Holland had great success in 1985 with his fun vampire romp Fright Night, and then became high demand in 1988 thanks to bringing Chucky to life with Child's Play. Holland was keeping his eye out for his next project to follow up Child's Play with, hoping for lightning to strike 3 times, where he became Demon Knight's director. However, he left the project and took a different turn away from horror and directed the comedy movie Fatal Beauty instead. Spoilers, the movie was a massive flop.
I haven't seen Fatal Beauty, so I can't say if it's good or not. But it's a shame, as considering Holland is the director of Fright Night and Child's Play, he would have been perfect for Demon Knight.
Number 8. Then another director lost Demon Knight due to directing a flop. After Tom Holland left Demon Knight, the project sat dormant collecting dust, till Pet Sematary director Mary Lambert got involved and intended to direct Demon Knight. She had some of her own visions of what the movie should be. For example, she wanted the heroic main lead, Frank Breaker, to be played by an African-American actor, in order to explore themes of, quote, the oppressed people of Earth also being its saviors. And considering that Lambert had Pet Sematary under her belt, she would have been a wise choice of director. So, where did it all go wrong? Well, it was Pet Sematary too. Lambert directed the horror sequel in 1992, and it was considered a commercial and critical flop, and thus she couldn't get studios or executives interested in the Demon Knight project. So away the Demon Knight script went again to collect even more dust.
I swear, this movie just couldn't seem to take off. But what do you expect from a script co-written by a guy called Mark Bishop? I bet he got a heap of the characters' names wrong too.
Number 7, Demon Knight was chosen out of a list of potential Tales from the Crypt movies. The Demon Knight script then found its way to a production company called Full Moon Features, whom were behind the Puppet Master movies, where the production still continued to stall, as the company couldn't do much with the script due to budgetary reasons, where finally the script found its way to big-time Hollywood producer Joel Silver, who also just happened to be a producer on the Tales from the Crypt TV series. At this time, Universal Pictures were planning on releasing a theatrical trilogy of Tales from the Crypt movies, as at this stage the show was in the later days of its TV run. The following year after Demon Knight's release would see the show's final season, where the production shifted to the UK to try and make it feel fresh and original. So a series of movies seemed like a logical step to try and keep the franchise alive. The plan was for Demon Knight to be the second part of the trilogy, as there was already 2 scripts that were potential first installments. They were called Body Count and Dead Easy. However, it was decided to make Demon Knight the first Tales from the Crypt movie, and Body Count and Dead Easy never ended up being filmed. It's also been stated that at this time there was consideration to make either The Frighteners or From Dusk Till Dawn first entries in the Tales from the Crypt cinematic trilogy, but the production went with Demon Knight. And filmmaker Ernest Dickerson came on board as director, who previously worked on the cinematography on a string of Spike Lee movies, and since Demon Knight has directed for popular TV shows like Dexter and The Walking Dead. Number 6. At one stage, Demon Knight wasn't going to feature any demons. Yeah, imagine that! A movie called Demon Knight which doesn't have any demons. That's like Gremlins without the Gremlins, or Jaws without a shark, or Ghost without a Patrick Swayze. It was felt that the budget Universal gave Demon Knight was too small to successfully create the demon minions seen in the movie. So a new script was written up where the collector's ghoulish servants took on the guise of salesmen, complete with black suits and sunglasses, making them sound more like the Men in Black than foul creatures from hell. However, the production urged Universal that there may be problems if a movie called Demon Knight doesn't feature any demons, but instead ghouls that look like yuppie businessmen. So thankfully, Universal forked out more money into the budget, so Demon Knight could have its demons.
However, Billy Zane is so wonderfully manic and over the top in Demon Knight, they probably could have just had him running amok and that still would have been great.
Number 5, Demon Knight was going to be a Halloween event, but became a Friday the 13th one instead. It was intended for Demon Knight to be released on Halloween 1994, so this ghoulish movie can be released at the most ghoulish time of the year. And it makes sense! Demon Knight has all the hallmarks of being a fun trick-or-treat Halloween movie. Heck, the whole thing basically screams Halloween. However, sadly, the movie just wasn't ready in time to be released on that date, probably due to all the setbacks that occurred during the movie's production. And if the release of Hocus Pocus is anything to go by, not releasing a Halloween movie on Halloween can lead to a disappointing box office performance. So Universal decided to focus on another day in the year that's notoriously known for horror, Friday the 13th. So instead, Demon Knight was released in January the 13th, 1995, which also just happened to be Friday the 13th. Although it's not Halloween, Demon Knight still had the momentum of being released on a macabre day of the year.
So in other words, Demon Knight could have been Mike Myers, but ended up being more Jason Voorhees.
Number 4, there's something about Demon Knight. A young, fresh-faced Cameron Diaz was nearly cast in Demon Knight. 1 year prior, the American actress made waves after starring in the Jim Carrey comedy fantasy juggernaut, The Mask. Universal Pictures really wanted to cast the actress in the role of Jerry Line, the hero who ends up taking down the Collector. However, director Ernest Dickerson really wanted to cast the future Mrs. Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith, in the role, and thus she was eventually cast, and Diaz wasn't. And so Smith would go on to have an entanglement with Demon Knight, but she would go on to further her career a few years later thanks to There's Something About Mary. In fact, Demon Knight features quite a selection of famous faces, including Thomas Hayden Church, who would go on to play the Sandman in Spider-Man 3, Charles Fleischer, who previously provided the voice of Roger Rabbit and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, along with everyone's favourite 80s cameo himself, the legendary Dick Miller. Man, I am so happy I get to talk about Dick Miller again. It's been way too long.
Happiness itself is a Dick Miller cameo.
Number 3, filming location. Most of the location filming for Demon Knight was filmed around Santa Clarita and Los Angeles. However, the interiors of the creepy church-converted boarding house were built in an abandoned airplane hangar in Van Nuys, California. Using the abandoned hangar to build sets on and to film in was actually quite beneficial to the production, as the events of Demon Knight took place over the course of one night, so for filming constant darkness was required, which a hangar could provide, which meant that filming could also take place during the day. However, there were a few minor issues with filming at the old abandoned location, namely birds whom had started nesting on the set, which would lead to sound interferences while shooting. So in order to put the birds off rattling and making noises, before filming would commence, members of the crew would fire shotguns filled with blanks. Wow, brings a whole new meaning to the term movie shoot. But regardless, when you watch Demon Knight now, you can do so knowing that the action isn't taking place in a creepy boarding house, but rather an airplane hangar.
Which is weird.
Number 2. Sequels. As mentioned, one of the scripts that was proposed to be the first Tales from the Crypt movie was called Dead Easy, and it was to be a New Orleans zombie horror caper. However, it was intended to make Dead Easy the second Tales from the Crypt movie after Demon Knight, which didn't happen, and the second movie became Bordello of Blood, which was written by Back to the Future's creators Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, all the way back in their college days. Once again, another Tales from the Crypt movie that predates the Tales from the Crypt TV show. Bordello of Blood was chosen because Zemeckis, who was also a co-producer on the TV series, was thinking about leaving Universal after getting an offer to join DreamWorks. So wanting to appease Zemeckis, Universal agreed to film his script for the second Tales from the Crypt movie. Bordello of Blood was released in 1996 and wasn't as financially successful as Demon Knight, and the critics weren't kind to it either. From my own memory, it just sort of came and went and no one was really talking about it. Well, at least in my neck of the woods they weren't. However, it does have a loyal fan base who argue that Bordello of Blood is a good movie, even as good as Demon Knight. It just never got its fair dues when it was released. The third Tales from the Crypt movie would become Ritual, which wasn't released until 2002, 6 years after Bordello of Blood. And this time Universal weren't behind the movie, but instead it was Dimension Films. And for a start, just look at the movie's poster. How cheap does that look? Like, there is no effort here, especially when compared to the Demon Knight poster. You can see a huge drop in poster artwork quality. This looks like the cover of a DVD you'll find in the $5 bin. In fact, Ritual skipped theaters entirely in the States and went straight to DVD. I have actually never seen Ritual, but I think it's a shame as having a top quality Tales from the Crypt film series could have worked, but it seems that the powers that be lost their nerve after Bordello of Blood. Number 1. Demon Knight Unleashed. So as mentioned, Demon Knight was released in January, Friday the 13th, 1995, and it made just over $21 million at the box office on an unspecified budget, but sources seem to suggest that the budget was quite low, so Demon Knight probably did take in quite a tidy little profit. Demon Knight received harsh backlash from critics, with complaints that the movie was neither funny or scary, and felt like a cheap made-for-TV affair. It was also accused of having sick jokes and being downright trashy. Yeah, critics with sticks up their butts as usual. The only outlet that seemed to be on Demon Knight's side was Bloody Disgusting, which called it one of the most underrated horror movie comedies of the 90s. But, as I always say when I make these episodes, its intended audience loved it. In other words, people who love Tales from the Crypt and aren't critics. The love people had for it is still strong, as Demon Knight has gone on to become a cult classic and a fan favourite to go back to and revisit on occasions like Halloween. The movie with all its insanity is there for all to enjoy, for all those who can't get enough of Billy Zane acting ridiculously over the top and generally batshit crazy. A movie with cheap laughs and frills and spills, but its unapologetic cheapness is without a doubt the movie's strongest appeal.
So is Demon Knight high art? No, it's not. By design, it's just a piece of harmless, ghoulish fun. It's an enjoyable product of its time, a time when Tales from the Crypt attempted to transcend the small screen onto the big screen. and all fans of Tales from the Crypt should check it out. As if you like the show, then you'll really enjoy Demon Knight. Anyway, I'm Minty, and seriously, we need more movies of Billy Zane acting crazy and popping sponges out of his mouth. See ya!